in his 20s, he had the drug problems, and God, I put him in rehab so many times, and every time he'd be doing great, and then it would just fall back. You've heard the same story from a million people.
Las Vegas isn't exactly known for its quiet mornings. But even by Sin City standards, what happened at the Harrison family compound on a Tuesday in 2018 was extraordinary. As the sun climbed over the desert landscape, Rick Harrison, the straight-talking, history-obsessed star of Pawn Stars, was jolted awake not by his alarm, but by the unmistakable sound of police megaphones. This is the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Exit the building with your hands visible. For a man who built his career evaluating the authenticity of historical artifacts, this was one real-life drama he never saw coming. Rick Harrison wasn't just any pawnshop owner. His gold and silver pawnshop had become a global tourist destination thanks to the runaway success of Pawn Stars, the History Channel phenomenon that transformed Harrison and his family into unlikely celebrities. The show's simple premise, following the daily operations of a family-run pawn business, had somehow captured lightning in a bottle, becoming one of cable television's biggest hits. But fame, as Harrison was about to discover, comes with unexpected hazards. At first, I thought it was a joke, Harrison later told reporters. Then I looked out my window and saw enough firepower to start a small war. The police response was massive. Tactical units, armored vehicles, snipers positioned on neighboring rooftops, and a helicopter circling overhead. In a city built on spectacle, this was still enough to draw crowds of onlookers and a swarm of news crews who arrived almost as quickly as the police. What triggered this overwhelming show of force? A phone call claiming that Harrison had murdered his son Corey after a violent argument about the business and was now barricaded inside with hostages and explosives. The caller, using technology to mask their location and identity, provided enough specific details about Harrison's home and family to make the threat credible. When we receive information about potential homicide and hostages, we have to respond with appropriate resources, explained Sheriff Joseph Lombardo. Until proven otherwise, we treat these situations as legitimate threats. As Harrison emerged from his home in a t-shirt and sweatpants, hands raised above his head, the absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on him. This was a man who spent his days haggling over Civil War memorabilia and vintage cars, not someone typically surrounded by SWAT teams. "I've dealt with some tense negotiations in my shop," Harrison quipped later, "but nothing quite like negotiating my way out of my own driveway with a dozen laser sights on my chest." The officers, following protocol, secured Harrison and entered the home to clear it room by room. What they found inside surprised many who only knew Harrison from his television persona. Instead of the treasure trove of historical artifacts one might expect, officers discovered a surprisingly normal family home. Yes, there were some unique items: a vintage jukebox in the living room, a collection of rare books on American history, and a few prized pieces of art. But mostly, it was just a comfortable family space with family photos, comfortable furniture, and the everyday clutter of real life. The most unexpected discovery came in Harrison's home office. Rather than the deal-making den viewers might have imagined, officers found a meticulously organized space filled with research materials. Bookshelves lined with historical reference texts, detailed notes on authentication techniques, and stacks of academic journals revealed the serious scholar behind the television personality. "People see me making quick assessments on TV and think it's just instinct," Harrison explained later. "What they don't see are the thousands of hours of research and study that go into building that knowledge base." As officers completed their sweep and confirmed there was no threat, the tension began to dissolve. Harrison's son Corey, who had been frantically trying to reach his father after seeing news reports about the incident, arrived at the scene visibly shaken but relieved. "When I heard the reports that I'd been murdered, that was pretty surreal," Corey said with characteristic dry humor. "I felt pretty good for a dead guy." With the immediate crisis resolved, attention turned to identifying the perpetrator of what was clearly a dangerous swatting prank. The practice of making false emergency calls to trigger massive police responses at innocent people's addresses. It wasn't the first time a celebrity had been targeted, but it was among the most elaborate and potentially dangerous incidents. The Harrison family was no stranger to security concerns. Running a pawn shop in Las Vegas meant dealing with valuable merchandise and cash transactions daily. But this was different. a targeted attack that brought the potential for tragic misunderstanding directly to their doorstep. In our business, we're always on guard against scams and frauds, Rick reflected. But this was a whole different level of malicious. Someone was willing to put lives at risk, mine, my family's, and the officers. Just for what? A sick joke? As investigators began tracing the call, parallel drama was unfolding at the gold and silver pawn shop, where confused employees and customers found themselves surrounded by police who had responded to the same threat. The shop, normally bustling with tourists hoping to catch a glimpse of television history in the making, was evacuated and closed, a rare occurrence for a business that prided itself on being open 24/7. "We've only closed a handful of times in our history," explained Chumley, Harrison's lovable if sometimes clueless employee and co-star. "Once for the old man's funeral, once for a major renovation, and now because someone said Rick went all Scarface on us. Not exactly the company we want to keep." In terms of reasons for closing, the old man he referred to was Richard Harrison, Rick's father and the patriarch of both the family and the business, who had passed away earlier that year. The mention of his recent death added an extra layer of emotional weight to an already stressful situation. Back at Harrison's home, as police began to dismantle their perimeter and return to normal operations, Rick invited the commanding officers inside for coffee, a gesture that surprised some, but made perfect sense to those who knew him well. "These guys were just doing their jobs," Harrison explained. "They responded to what they thought was a serious threat. I've got nothing but respect for that." Over coffee in his kitchen, Harrison shared stories about the realities of running a pawn business in the age of reality television. He talked about the strange items people brought in, hoping to be on camera, the security measures at the shop that viewers never see, and the balance between entertainment and education that he tried to maintain on the show. "People think they know everything about us because they watch the show," he told the officers. "But that's like saying you understand how a restaurant works because you've eaten dinner. There's a whole operation behind the scenes that never makes it to television." The officers, many of whom admitted to being fans of the show, were particularly interested in whether the negotiations shown on TV were authentic or staged for drama. "What you see is real, but it's compressed," Harrison explained. "A negotiation that takes 30 minutes gets edited down to 3 minutes of television. And yeah, sometimes we play up the drama a bit. That's entertainment. But the core of it, the history, the appraisals, the deals, that's all legitimate." As the impromptu gathering wound down, Harrison had one request of the officers: that they keep what they saw in his home private. Not because there was anything to hide, but because he valued the separation between his public and private lives. "The show is the show, and home is home," he said. "I've always tried to keep those worlds apart as much as possible." The officers agreed, though by then, news helicopters had broadcast images of the police response to viewers across the country. Harrison's phone was already filling with concerned messages from friends, family, and business associates wondering what had happened. Among those messages was one from Mike Wolfe of American Pickers, another History Channel star who had experienced a similar swatting incident the previous year. "Welcome to the club, nobody wants to join," Wolfe's message read. "Glad you're okay. This stuff is no joke." Indeed, the potential dangers of swatting had been tragically demonstrated just months earlier when an innocent man in Kansas was killed by police responding to a false emergency call. That incident had led to increased awareness among law enforcement about the phenomenon and calls for stricter penalties for those who perpetrate such hoaxes. For Harrison, the incident was a jarring reminder of the darker side of fame. "You expect certain things when you become a public figure," he reflected. "People recognize you at restaurants. They want autographs. They feel like they know you. But having armed police surround your house because someone decided to target you, that's not in the celebrity handbook they hand out." The investigation into who made the call continued for weeks. Digital forensics experts traced the call through a maze of virtual private networks and spoofed numbers, eventually leading to a surprising source: a 17-year-old from New Jersey who was part of an online community that treated swatting as a competitive game. When asked why he targeted Harrison specifically, the teen's answer was revealing: "Because he's always so confident on TV. I wanted to see what would happen when he lost control of the situation." Harrison declined to press charges against the teen, instead agreeing to participate in a restorative justice program that included a supervised video call between them. "I wanted him to understand the real-world consequences of what he did," Harrison explained. This wasn't a game or a prank. People could have died because of his actions. During that call, Harrison spoke not as the tough negotiator from television, but as a father and businessman concerned about the direction of a young life. I told him that I built my business on understanding the value of things, not just objects, but actions, choices, and character, Harrison recounted. And what he did had no value. It didn't build anything. It didn't create anything. It just put people at risk for a moment of excitement. The teen, faced with the real person behind the television persona, broke down in tears. I never thought about you as a real person with a family, he admitted. You were just a character on a show to me. That disconnect between media personalities and their humanity became something Harrison spoke about frequently in the aftermath of the incident. He even incorporated elements of the experience into talks he gave at conventions and business seminars. In the pawn business, we're constantly assessing what things are really worth, he would tell audiences. But that morning, surrounded by police who thought I might be a murderer, I got a pretty stark reminder of what actually matters. And it's not the stuff we buy and sell on the show. The swatting incident, while frightening and disruptive, ultimately revealed something important about one of reality television's most recognizable figures. Behind the shrewd businessman and television personality was a person of surprising depth, a dedicated father, a serious student of history, and someone who valued privacy and normalcy despite his public profile. People think they know you because they see you on TV, Harrison reflected a year after the incident. But that's just a slice of who you are. The real person is always more complicated, more contradictory, and hopefully more interesting than what fits into a 30-minute episode. For the officers who responded that morning, the experience changed how they viewed not just Rick Harrison, but celebrity culture in general. The gap between public perception and private reality had never been more apparent. I went in there expecting to meet the tough negotiator from TV, one officer admitted. Instead, I met a normal guy who was just as shocked as anyone would be to find their home surrounded by police. It was a good reminder not to confuse the persona with the person. As for Harrison himself, he took the incident in stride, even joking about it on later episodes of Pawn Stars. When asked if the experience had left him shaken or angry, his response was characteristically pragmatic. In the pawn business, you learn to expect the unexpected. Usually that means someone bringing in a rare coin or a piece of history you've never seen before. This time it meant explaining to a SWAT team that no, I hadn't actually murdered my son. Just another day in Las Vegas, I guess.